treasure of a people from a distant land, stored carefully, a gift of culture to be shared for all time. Today's Ukrainian Americans live the culture of their forefathers. They share a treasure of many colors, many cadences, many values. A gift brought to this country little by little in the arms and hearts of people who arrived seeking the most precious treasure of all, freedom, the chance to be masters of their own fate. History sometimes tells its stories with great precision, more often with tantalizing incompleteness. The colonization of America, details are blurred. Often, all that is left is a list of names. Some Slavic, a few Ukrainian. Captain John Smith, in 1603, while traveling through Ukrainian lands, he met a nobleman, Ivan Bohdan, from the region of Kolomea. 5 years later, Bohdan joined Smith on the great adventure to the New World. Sailing with them, a countryman, Dr. Lawrence Mohun. The shipload of settlers dropped anchor in a quiet harbor and set about building Jamestown. It was the first permanent English settlement in the New World. Over the next 100 years, the list of settlers arriving in America swelled with many a Ukrainian name. Kulyavi, Malishko, Andrus, Zaborovsky, Nemerich. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles to the west, Russian adventurers are exploring the northern Pacific. With them were Ukrainian Cossacks, exiles from Siberia. Arctic seas slashed at their boats long before Bering discovered Alaska. 1669, the Cossack Luka Morosko sails into Kamchatka and the Aleutians. The trickle of adventurers from Siberia swelled into a stream of colonists. In the 126 years of Russian sovereignty over Alaska, their colonies reached south to San Francisco. 1803, Yuri Lysyansky, a Ukrainian captain in the service of the Russian Navy. While circumnavigating the world, he drops anchor at Kodiak Island. He paints the Russian settlement there, then called St. Paul. Little remains today of the Ukrainian Cossacks, the earliest colonizers of Alaska. Sitka, a silent witness to their presence long ago, remains in St. Michael's Church. A treasure lovingly brought from the faraway homeland. A holy icon of Madonna and Child, the work of the great Ukrainian iconographer, Borovikovsky. The Alaska Herald, first Slavic newspaper in California. Editor, Agapius Honcharenko, studied the Alaskan Cossacks. Honcharenko, an Orthodox priest, escaped Tsarist Russia to America in 1865. Educator, firebrand editor, he was a dedicated defender of Alaska. Honcharenko marks the end of the individual Ukrainian immigrant to the New World. By the 1870s, Ukrainians living miserably under Austro-Hungarian rule were selling their meager possessions to buy a ticket to America. They set sail by the boatload. The first of 3 large waves of immigration brought 500,000 people. They would be the foundation of the Ukrainian-American community. The memory of that journey for those who suffered through it would stay with them for the rest of their lives.
Well, I was exactly 6.5 years old, and we come on a ship, and nobody knowed what kind of a ship this was. And we was on that ship for 30 days. And here, it must have been a cattle ship. Well, the only thing I could remember about that cattle ship is that I was like sick. and I was down on the bottom floor of it, and peeping through one of these round holes, and all the sharks coming to it too. But when we got to America, I didn't remember too much about how we got here, where we went, till we got to Berwick, to our hometown. Being in Berwick, and I was 6.5 years old. From there, I went to school, one-room schoolhouse. From this one-room schoolhouse, I went there. I was only there about a half a year, and I was the first one to sing Star Spangled Banner. I learned that first. They were raising the flag.
Loyalty to the adopted homeland came naturally to these people. It sprang from gratitude for the rich opportunities they found here. For the young, the chance of an education. For their parents, unskilled peasants, a life of economic freedom. Each family grew, each family gained new skills and trades.
My grandfather came to America somewhere around 1895 because he was tired of living under oppression in Ukraine. And my father came here in 1909 for somebody that came from very poor families, like there's doctors, there's dentists, pharmacists, there's priests, there's some studying to be priests. We have over 500 people in our family today. Some naturally die and some naturally are born, so it sort of balances itself out.
My father, Dmitro Kapitula, came to the United States in November of 1889 at the age of 16. He came to New York, and from New York he arrived into Audenried, Pennsylvania. Then he began to work in the mines as a slate picker, and he made 60 cents a day for a 10-hour shift.
Most slate pickers were boys. Children grew up fast. Hard work was nothing new to the Ukrainians. In the old country, entire families labored dawn to dark in the fields. Here they were eager to work.
I come and he say, what do you do? I say, I look for a job. I don't talk speak too much, you know, I'll in a little bit, yeah. He say, you too young. What do you mean I'm too young? How you think I'm going to live here? He laugh at me. I say, you come tomorrow and go to work. Yeah.
Pennsylvania was hungry for laborers. For the times, pay was high in the iron and coal industry. The work, difficult and dangerous. Millions of tons of coal came to the top from shafts as deep as 700 feet. The result for the men was often crippling lung disease, early death.
I couldn't breathe anymore because of so much dust in the place that I had to take an outside job. At that time, they didn't have any help at all for miners. But one thing I can say is, it's no place for a human being.
Well, my parents were like most Ukrainian parents in the area. They came from the Ukraine, settled originally in Canada for a couple of years, went to New York. They met and married in New York, even though they lived just a couple of miles from each other in the Ukraine, somewhere near, well, one of them was from, my father was from a little town called Ivanya. She was from near Kiev. Anyway, they met and married in New York, came here. He became a miner and mined coal for about 40 years. She was obviously for 40 years a coal miner's wife. And then he died from what most miners were dying of at that time, the black lung. That's 25 years ago.
It was tough because our class of people was last to get hired, first to get fired. And they would treat you awfully mean. You always got the hardest job that there ever was.
The hardest jobs went to the newest arrivals, Ukrainian newcomers. The men and boys labored in the mines. The little ones worked side by side with their mothers. A wooden shack was home. The coal towns grew crowded. The new arrivals were unwelcome. To the established coal miners struggling to organize, they were scabs.
They said they come to America, take their jobs. And our children, our children and Irish children or the other nationality always fight with our kids. Even in school, they go to school, they don't like our children. Even teacher was complained sometimes. They are not smart like American kids.
They called us the greenies. That's all we was. All the children that were European, they were born in America, but still we were greenies because our parents were greenies. None of them could talk.
Ignorant of the language, unaware of the issues, it was a violent time. Before long, they understood and soon joined the labor movement. The movement grew. Strikes turned violent. Strikes, mine accidents. The results were the same for widows and children left with no means of support. No company pensions, no government help. The people had to help themselves. They formed fraternal benefit societies whose numbers grew rapidly. Providing leadership in the fledgling Ukrainian community is Father Ivan Volyansky, the first Greek Catholic priest sent from Ukraine in 1884. Volyansky builds St. Michael's, the first Ukrainian Catholic church in America. He publishes a newspaper, and he joins the labor movement. In 1890, another leader arrives, Father Gregor Hrushka, a strong proponent of immigration to America.
He was a very nice priest, and he was telling us about Ukrainian. We don't know nothing that time yet about Ukrainian. He was living under Austria-Hungary at that time, you know. Then he told them it's Ukrainian, we're not Polish, we're Ukrainian. He told us America is a nice country. I said we're very glad to go there. He started the Ukrainian paper, Svoboda.
Svoboda, liberty. First published in 1893, the newspaper continues to publish to this day. Father Hrushka made his newspaper the strongest voice of the Ukrainian immigrant community in America. Hrushka used its pages to press for unity among the increasingly divergent brotherhoods. Like the 13 original colonies uniting, so did 13 brotherhoods on Washington's birthday, 1894. The Ukrainian National Association continues to the present, and to this day, it carries out its mandate to help Ukrainians in America to support the struggle for freedom in Ukraine. Witness to the growth of the largest Ukrainian organization in America is Roman Slobodyan, retired UNA treasurer.
I worked for Ukrainian National Association for 46 years. I started with less than $500,000. And when I left after 46 years, there was $31 million of assets and was $8 million reserve for foundation for a new building which has been built in Jersey City at a cost of over $14 million.
Some of the first wave immigrants went west before the First World War. They were people of the soil, determined to farm. many homestead in North Dakota.
In the springtime and in the fall, when we're very busy, we can't find anybody else, so the wife has to go out and fill in. My grandmother worked all the time in the field, all year round, and her mother took care of the children. She would have her babies, and the same day would go right back out in the field.
But the grasslands, lonely and wild, presented the settler with unfamiliar problems. The isolation of endless prairie without people. Homesteads were abandoned to loneliness, to discouragement, to death. Those who had the courage to survive recall.
I come from Ukrainian country, 1913, when I was 20 years old. So I decided to go on a farm, that's all I know it. So I bought it, 80 acres was nothing here, prairie. So I built it up. Now I got a big place, I'm proud of it, over 2,000 acres. When I come just to live, there was no place, one tree, no place. Nobody had a tree, there was so lonesome, I just couldn't even run nuts. I'm the first one to start planting a tree in this territory. Now we got all kind of a tree.
Cowboy Pete Basaraba broke horses for a living. How were those first days in this wild land?
I tell you, that was easy because we come from the bad and we come to the bad. See? Just now this year, our kids, they got it in good. And as soon as they start bad, that'd be awful bad for them. And for us, it wasn't bad, you see?
It isn't bad for Bill Palanuk, working the family homestead.
I'm farming because it's traditional. I'm a fourth-generation farmer. My great-great-grandfather came over in 1897 from the Ukraine, and he started farming under the Homestead Act, which was 160 acres, you know, offered by the government. I enjoy farming. Heck, I can come out here and go, "Barr!" No one's going to hear me, and I have a good time with myself, and I enjoy it.
Still, time is running out for the small farm in urbanizing America. In North Dakota, yet another specter threatens the traditional life of the farmer: oil. Barrel by barrel, it enriches people who had counted their fortunes by the turn of the seasons rather than the pulse of an oil pump.
In my younger days, it was pretty tough going. We stuck it through thick and thin, and in 1976, oil was discovered on our land. And now it's a little bit easier for us. And, you know, we had some enemies too because we got oil wells. That's it.
Our lifestyle hasn't changed a bit.
Organically.
We still raise animals and food, and we think that food is more important than money.
The Austro-Hungarian Empire, source of the first wave of immigrants, collapses in war. The Tsarist Empire explodes into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. For a brief moment of desperate struggle, Ukraine gains its independence. The 4 years from 1917 to 1920 were enough to remind Ukrainians of the fragrance of freedom denied them over hundreds of years of foreign domination. The awakened Ukrainian national consciousness carried to America. After the war, the flow of immigration resumed, but only 40,000 were allowed. This second wave brought skills and education. Kiev-born Igor Sikorsky, inventor for the Tsarist government, immigrated to America. In 1941, he presented the world with its first practical helicopter. Continued design improvements gave the United States its superiority in the field. Another Kievan, Stephen Timoshenko, founding member of the Ukrainian Academy of Arts and Sciences in independent Ukraine, brought his expertise in astronautics to the United States in 1922. Timoshenko's life work in applied mechanics is the basis for modern space flight. The firing of every rocket, it is said, is attributed to Timoshenko's memory. And again from Kiev came an artist whose fame preceded his arrival in 1923. Alexander Archipenko, master of modern sculpture, father of negative space. Archipenko carried Cubist theory into sculpture. His expressive forms grace the finest collections in the world. The post-World War I immigrant quickly adapted to the new land. Stephen Karapis. For him, the very American Thanksgiving holiday has special meaning. He found his future here. He has faith that his grandsons are assured of theirs. His son, Dr. Myron Karapis, Special Assistant to the President for Ethnic Affairs.
The reason I came here, I was looking for the future. There was no future for people like me who belong to the second immigration to the United States. The reason we were politically and militarily engaged in fighting for Ukrainian independence, and that's why we couldn't get no job in our native land.
The promises of the new communist regime went unfulfilled. Land was confiscated. Stalin's genocidal decrees to collectivize farmers brought the horror of 6 million deaths by artificial famine. Americans would not believe it, at least those who heard. Most were busy coping with their own problem, the Depression. Lines for bread in America, rows of the dead in Ukraine. America attacked its problem in its own unique way. A World's Fair in Chicago, a century of progress to boost morale and rally people. The fair also provided Ukrainian Americans with the opportunity of drawing attention to the tragedy in the homeland. They did it in the only way they could, through culture. August 17th, 1933, Ukrainian Day at the fair. They build the only non-government pavilion at the fair and win first prize. Their spirit pours out in their dancing. Leading the dancers is yet another brilliant young immigrant, dancer-choreographer Vasily Avramenko. Arriving in 1926, he traveled across the continent, leaving folk dance groups in his wake. His career saw his influence spread through 3 generations of dancers.
І я то старався, щоб ті кроки були оригінальні, такі, як були на Україні. В Америці найліпший виступ був у 1931 році в Метрополітен Опера, де виступало понад 700 танцюристів і український хор. І взагалі то була одна із найбільших вистав, яка зарекордована і записана великими професорами.
The dancing stopped when World War II began. Ukrainian Americans joined the service. Many did not return. The history of Ukrainians fighting for freedom under the American flag is a long one. World War II. World War I. Ukrainian names number among those fighting in the Revolutionary War. Even more Ukrainian Americans fought the Civil War. One was a young brigadier commanding the 19th Illinois Volunteers. Formerly a colonel in the Imperial Russian Army, Basil Turchin became known as the Terrible Cossack to his rebel enemies after the Battle of Chickamauga. The grateful United States awarded him the rank of general. Fighting for freedom, for existence itself, has become a tradition with the Ukrainians. The end of World War II, millions wander homeless in Europe. Displaced persons camps are set up. The Allies begin arranging resettlement.
Well, my involvement in the resettlement of Ukrainian displaced persons, victims of war, goes back to 1945, after the end of the war. There were over 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Germany and other countries. So the Ukrainians in the United States, organizations, churches, and so on, organized a committee called the United Ukrainian American Relief Committee to help in the resettlement, to provide relief and intervention for those who were being forcefully repatriated and who did not want to return to their countries of origin for fear of religious and political persecution.
Many DPs did not make it to America. At Yalta, Stalin demands the return of Soviet refugees. Roosevelt and Churchill sign over 2 million lives. Many commit suicide during the forced repatriation. Those who made it to the United States went under strict government regulations. Guarantees were required from the sponsors,
such as an assurance of a shelter or a home, of a job, proper health, transportation, and that they would not become public charges once they came to the United States. These assurances were provided, and we resettled some 35,000 Ukrainian refugees in the United States.
All told, organizations and individuals sponsored 85,000 Ukrainians. They were mostly well-educated professionals and skilled workers. They progressed rapidly in their new homeland. They learned English, their children went to school. They contributed to science, medicine, education, sports, and the arts. Life today is richer because of the achievements of these successive waves of immigrants. In uprooting themselves and risking their destinies, they improve their lives and they enhance the quality and diversity of all our lives. One of every 100 Americans today is of Ukrainian origin. The combined numbers from 3 great waves of immigration and their children. Fiercely proud of its new home and spiritually linked to Ukraine, this community unites on important issues. Harvard University, seat of the Ukrainian Research Institute. Initiated by students, it gained wide support among the Ukrainian community, which raised $3 million to fund Ukrainian studies.
3 chairs in Ukrainian subjects have been established: language, literature, and history. The most important chairs to ensure the development of knowledge about the ethnic and national problems.
The aim of our research is to make Ukrainian studies a part of the international and world scholarly process, because all scholarly activity is international activity.
Academic and cultural events are held at the Ukrainian Institute of America, a historic landmark on New York's Fifth Avenue. The Institute was founded by William Juice, an immigrant farmer who became an inventor, industrialist, and philanthropist. The Zeus fastener was critical for American air power during World War II. Swarthmore College professor Dr. Olexa Bilanyuk came to America after World War II. A leading specialist in experimental and theoretical physics, he is widely published on the subjects of the structure of nuclei and the question of faster-than-light motion.
Well, reading Faust, I have found that, and I agreed, the older I got, I agreed that there are essentially two worthwhile pursuits in life: love and your intellect, capability of your intellect to understand the surrounding world. And these two have captured my imagination, and as far as my profession is concerned, I have chosen physics because that is a full-time occupation, just pursuing the attempt at understanding the surrounding world, and I consider that to be very fascinating. If they wouldn't pay me for that, I'd try to do that in my basement.
I came here as a Ukrainian immigrant. Fortunately enough, I was young enough and ambitious enough to go into a school. So I went to Columbia University in New York City, where I got all my degrees, bachelor, master's, and eventually PhD. And I never felt in any way handicapped, because I also recognize myself as a Ukrainian, as being part of the Ukrainian community. And it never interferes then, and it doesn't interfere now in this respect.
But identity is more troubling to artists among the new immigrants. Is their obligation to themselves or to the culture they left behind? Jacques Gniezdowski, painter and printmaker. After coming to this country, he forged an international reputation as a master of the modern woodcut.
Of course, my first encounter with America was very difficult. I had to readjust many views I had on art, on life, and so on. Especially in art, many of Ukrainian artists came. And of course, we had discussion what our function is in new country, what we have to do. Many were view that we should continue our art as some sort of obligation to our country from where we came. My view was that everyone create art without regard whether this will be national or international. The only obligation, honest work.
An important artist for the Ukrainian community is painter Edward Kozak. His mission is to continue the artistic heritage of the homeland.
Ми, українські малярі, не приїхали до Америки з порожніми руками. Кожен привіз частинку своєї України, частину тої культури, яка тривала у нас понад 1000 років, яка на наших очах пропадає. Я моїм малярством тримаю виключно український характер. Власне, для того, що я почуваю на собі наче обов'язок продовжити те, що там пропало.
This sense of obligation to save a culture is shared by many Ukrainian artists and craftsmen. Oleksandr and Petro Honcharenko have spent their lives in America perfecting the Ukrainian national instrument, the bandura. The bandura, a musical instrument associated with the freedom of a people, its very soul. The Soviets and occupying forces before them considered it a threat. In his memoirs, the renowned Russian composer Dmitri Shostakovich talks about the Bandurists, who since time immemorial wandered Ukraine, singing stories of Cossack glory and human tragedy. They were blind and defenseless people, but no one ever touched or hurt them, he wrote. Hurting a blind man, what could be lower? Then in our century, Stalin called a congress of all those blind, wandering storytellers and folk singers. Hundreds came. A living museum, the country's living history, its songs, its music, its poetry. And they were almost all shot. Almost all those pathetic blind men killed. But the spirit lives. The Ukrainian Bandurist chorus, 50 men who rekindled the flame. Led by Grigory Kitasty and Volodymyr Bozik, the chorus was brought over by the United Ukrainian American Relief Committee after World War II. And like Avramenko and his folk dances, the Bandurists have inspired the rebirth of the Bandura throughout the United States and Canada. Like the song of the Bandura, the words of the great patriot poet Taras Shevchenko carry the spirit across the distance of miles and years. A monument to Shevchenko is erected by Ukrainians in the free world. 100,000 of them come to Washington on a hot summer day.
Of a poet who expressed so eloquently man's undying determination to fight for freedom and his unquenchable faith in ultimate victory.
I care not, shall I see my dear own land before I die, or no? Nor who forgets me buried here in desert wastes of alien snow. Though all forget me, better so. A slave from my first bitter years, most surely I shall die a slave, ungraced of any kinsman's tears, and carry with me to my grave everything, and leave no trace, no little mark to keep my place in the dear lost Ukraine, which is not ours, though our land, and none shall ever understand. No father to his son shall say, kneel down and fold your hands and pray. He died for our Ukraine. I care no longer if the child shall pray for me or pass me by. One only thing I cannot bear, to know my land that was beguiled into a death trap with a lie, trampled and ruined and defiled. Oh, but I care. Dear God, I care. Shevchenko taught his people, study, think, read, learn from others, but do not forsake your own. Even at leisure, they learn.
They come here to learn their heritage. It's so important to have your own heritage. then you go to market.
At Soyuzivka, young and old come to meet and play. Many participate in sports. The health of the body is as important as the development of the mind. That philosophy has developed giants of American sports. Bill Mosienko, Terry Sawchuk, Mike Bossy, and none bigger than Bronco Nagurski, perhaps the greatest all-round football player in the history of the game. And beyond the physical, the spiritual. At the heart of the spiritual life lies the church. The domes of faith grace skylines all over America. More than 250,000 Ukrainian Catholics worship their archeparchy in Philadelphia. The 100,000 Orthodox have their major center in South Bound Brook, New Jersey. Some 50,000 belong to the Protestant denominations. Marvelous examples of the artistic instinct inspired by faith are the pisanki, Ukrainian Easter eggs. Marie Prosai and her family almost single-handedly revived the ancient art in this country.
Я приїхала дуже молоденькою до Америки, і мені тільки було 15 років. А якраз було перед Великоднем. Я пішла до церкви Велику П'ятницю. Там мені всередилося Великдень. Я прийшла додому, почала писати писанку. І від того дня я до сьогодні пишу писанку. Бо вона мені дуже близьке і дороге, щось та писанка промовляє. Щось рідне, дуже близьке.
Pisanki are but one aspect of the colorful Easter ritual. Spring, nature's rebirth, inspires the outdoor celebration of the resurrection. Symbolic foods are reverently prepared for the blessing of the Easter baskets.
Благословляється і освящається ім'я Отця і Сина і Святого Духа. Амінь.
St. Andrew's Church, South Bound Brook, New Jersey. A memorial to the 6 million dead in Stalin's artificial famine. A striking celebration occurs on the Sunday following Easter, the Day of the Dead. The good news of Christ's resurrection is shared with departed loved ones. Church activities, sacred and social, sustain the communities.
Ішов я раз по стежі, поміж терени, і здивав я дівчину, що несла пироги. Ой, чула, 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 ой, чула, чула ти, і здивав я дівчину, що несла пироги. Дівча моя хороша, чи знаєш мої сни, що я тебе кохаю, і сиром пироги. Ой, чула, 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 ой, чула, чула ти, що я тебе кохаю, і сиром пироги.
I enjoy the Ukrainian traditions, the food. I was part of a dance group and in church, but then again, I'm still in America and I enjoy good old rock and roll.
Максим гуляв, батько серпали саме. Ой, літає горився зв'язане морята. Гуляв Максим, гуляв батько, а за ним хлоп'ята. А за ним хлоп'ята.
Ukrainians live by their music. Modern, pop, opera, the classics. And always at the heart are the folk songs. Wherever Ukrainians cluster, there is likely to be a museum. The museums are not always formal institutions. In New York City, pioneer Myron Surmach and his son, Myron Jr., display fine examples of folk art in their store.
Here, Myron, I just brought honey from home. It's with the ginseng root.
Even their office is decorated in the Ukrainian manner. But it is at the many festivals held throughout the country that the cultural experience bursts into full bloom.
Welcome to the Ukrainian Day celebration. The purpose of this observance is for the Ukrainians to share with their neighbors and friends the cultural heritage of their motherland, the dances, the songs, and the folk arts that they, or in some cases, their ancestors, have brought with them from their home country to this beautiful, free, and hospitable land, and which are faithfully transmitted from father to son, from mother to daughter, as part of their national tradition. But another purpose of this observance is for us to tell you about the terrible plight of our brothers and sisters who live in Ukraine today.
Tens of thousands in Soviet concentration camps, many of them Ukrainian dissidents, their crime, wishing to express and live their heritage. Very few, like Nadia Svitlichna, are here, living testimony to those who cannot leave.
Karavansky, as a poet and writer, has for many years struggled to defend the rights of the Ukrainian people to a separate culture and language. And whereas in punishment they were incarcerated 34 years collectively in Soviet labor camps for defending these rights, and whereas the American people support the fundamental freedoms embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the provisions of the Helsinki Accords. Now, therefore, as mayor of the city of Minneapolis, I do hereby grant Dr. Nina Strukada Karavanska and Sviatoslav Karavansky honorary membership in the city of Minneapolis. So, let me...
Yeah, I thank you very much.
I have now one other document here. This is a...
I answer to you for all.
All right. This is a more formal document making you an honorary citizen of our city. It gives you all of the rights and privileges, but you don't have to pay any taxes.
I must move to your city.
Then you'll have to pay.
Now among veterans of the Ukrainian armies he once fought, ex-Soviet General Petro Grigorenko. He is head of the foreign representation of the Ukrainian Helsinki Group. Other members of his group are in prison or in exile. Samuel Jaskilka, a four-star general who rose to assistant commandant of the Marine Corps. He's used to questions about his name.
Well, you know, everybody ever saw it. It was quite a mouthful for most people. And so I'd spell it out for them, tell them to pronounce every letter, and they'd have it made. And they'd ask inevitably, what kind of a name is that? And I'd say, it's Ukrainian. And almost inevitably the answer would come back, well, that's Russian, isn't it? And I'd say, the hell it is, it's Ukrainian, and there's a difference. I feel I'm of Ukrainian descent with absolutely no ties to the Russians. You know, many people claim that I've come from Polish extraction, and of course it took me quite a while to convince them that such is not the case. But the most interesting example, I think, took place in 1976 after the Olympic Games in Canada. It seemed that the United States and the USSR had a duo track meet at College Park in Maryland. Prior to that event, the Washington Post hosted a cocktail party for the officials of both teams. And since the U.S. Marine Band was playing the music for the opening ceremonies, I was invited to attend the cocktail party and indeed the meet, because I'm a great sports fan. Well, sure enough, in about 5 minutes, one of my hosts took me over to meet Ambassador Dobrynin of the Soviet Union and introduced me to him. And I can tell the minute he said my name, the light came on Ambassador Dobrynin's head. And it wasn't long before he said, "General, what kind of a name is that?" And my answer was, "Sir, my parents came from the Ukraine." "Ah," he said, "Ukrainian people," he said, they are certainly fine musicians. I said, "Yes, my mother told me." And he said, "And the Ukrainians are fine poets." I said, "Yes, sir, my mother told me that too." About that time, he noticed that I was a U.S. Marine, and he said, "You know, General, the Cossacks were fine fighters." I said, "Yes, I know, my mother told me that too." Well, then a few more innocent comments passed, and finally he came back in his affable fashion, and he said, "You know, General, we're all Russians." And I said, "Not according to my mother, sir."
P-51, the outstanding fighter of World War II. The pilot, Colonel Paul Poborezny, founder and president of the Experimental Aircraft Association, a worldwide organization with branches in 92 countries.
I'm certainly proud of my Ukrainian heritage, and maybe possibly the desire of Ukrainians for the freedoms that people enjoy was a part of getting me very interested in aviation at a very early age. The love of freedom and a can-do attitude is very, very important. I know my dad was very firm with me, and I felt probably at the time he might have been a little over firm, but I found out that his strong leadership sure rubbed off on me.
The loftiest flight, space. At North American Rockwell Space Shuttle Assembly Plant in California, Challenger, successor to the Columbia Space Shuttle, is being assembled.
I came to this country in 1951 as a young man of 17 years old, just graduated from high school in Germany as we were passing through as refugees. And then I entered New York University and finally got my PhD at Columbia University. But I always, since I was a little boy, since I was 7 years old, I've been looking at the stars and dreaming of getting into the space business and building spaceships. I was very lucky to have gotten into the kind of schools, had the kind of parental guidance, and the general opportunity that this country gave me to build on it and to really wind up being involved in the space shuttle itself as in charge of advanced planning for NASA. I started working on space stations and launch vehicles that would be reused. They would be used like an airplane. So after all these years, this shuttle idea was born. I remember a few years ago when I got out of graduate school and worked in industry for a few years, President Kennedy made the announcement that we should land a man on the moon within a decade. I was very turned on by this. I considered that to be the opportunity, and I left industry, went to NASA, and there were just a small group of us, just a little handful of people. We started out with a blank piece of paper. The man said, "Let's go to the moon." Well, we started designing it. And I was a very young engineer and had obviously more responsibility than I deserved at that time, but it was that kind of an era where we were all young trying to reach for the stars.
The helm of ships that first pointed westward may find their ultimate destination somewhere among the stars. They leave in their wake the truth. As surely as we are all linked to our own individual pasts, each one's roots, wherever they lie, ultimately nourish our mutual destiny.
Ukrainian American.
Ukrainian American.
What are you?
Ukrainian American and Greek. Oh, I'm a Ukrainian American. Ukrainian and American.
Yes, I'm American.
Ukrainian American.
Are you twins?
You look like
Ukrainian. Ukrainian.
We are Americans of Ukrainian descent.
And you?
I agree with that.